So welcome, everybody. I appreciate you being here for Fireside Chat on AI and marketing with somebody I think who really knows what both the past and future looks like.
I wish.
Well, we're gonna test here to see how well you did in the past. Okay,
well, give me my great grade at the end.
But I don't know if you saw my notes, but I have a very funny question for you. It's very personal. So my last name is Stuart, S-T-U-A-R-T. Your middle name is Stuart.
Yes.
Is there history to the name within your family?
Actually, the more interesting, so it's Martin Stuart Sorrell. So it's more, I don't know whether my mother and father forecast Trump, if anybody can figure out what I'm talking about. You know, Scottish mother. If you're trying to curry favor with the Trump regime, maybe
I hear there's a lot of that going on right now. Right?
Maybe it should be spelled E-W and not U-A.
Right.
But actually, the more interesting thing from my perspective is the Martin, because I had a brother who died. Oh. And he died of dry birth a year earlier. So M is for Michael. Because in Jewish religion, you don't repeat. Often you don't repeat the dead person's name, but you by initial. And then Sorrell was not my father's name. And actually, it's relevant now because, you know, a lot of anti-Semitism at the minute, or not at the minute, particularly fraught at the moment, yes. Historically and now. And Sorrell was a changed name. It is revealed it's in Ken Letter's book, actually, what my family name was. In 1924, my father read a book by a man called Warwick Deeping called Sorrell and Son, which the BBC actually converted into a series. It's about the relationship between a father and a son. Oh. And the father was upstairs. You know, if you saw upstairs, downstairs, you know, butler in an aristocratic family. And the father scrimped and saved for his son to go to private school. And that was Sorrell and Son. My father loved the story. And so he changed his name.
That has a bit
Sorrell.
of reference to Stuart, because the stewards of the house took over when whoever the Lord died or whatever.
So you got more than you bargained for.
There we go, exactly, yeah. Mine was just basically we run out of, I'm Scotch Irish, so we were just run out of the country. So horse thieves, I don't know what the history is. Okay, listen, here's the thing. I had Bob Pittman from iHeartMedia speak at one of my events. A few years ago. Yeah. And he said to me what was the most interesting thing. He said, the only advantage to being older, which you and I probably qualify. The only advantage
I certainly do. I don't know about you.
I do. Is pattern recognition. So I think it'd be interesting, Martin, to just kind of, listen, we're at a huge inflection point, right? The world is just lit up like never tomorrow. Like, this is real. It's not meta. This is metaverse. This is real. Okay. So as you look back and the changes you've seen, you would have been around during the age of the internet. I was at Y&R. I was at Y&R leading internet for them, by the way. Funny, which you eventually purchased the company. But
we merged, actually. We merged in 2000. It was we were 2/3 and they were 1/3. So I guess it was an acquisition, but sort of rather Omnicom and IPG, isn't it, really, at the end of the day? But anyway, it's...
okay, so as you look back at some of the history that changes, I mean, sort of take the past history that you've seen, you look back, and reflect on what you think is happening right now with AI.
So, well, look, a couple of things about that. First of all, it's trite to talk about this in terms of being another industrial revolution, but here goes. I mean, this is another, whether it's the third or the fourth or the fifth, God alone knows. But, I mean, it is a huge, huge change. I think that if Bob is right about pattern recognition being the only advantage, I mean, the one thing you do learn is you always underestimate the change. I was very struck by Sundar's response to analysts recently when Alphabet were pressed on whether they were overspending on CapEx. Google spending probably about 60 billion, 15 billion a quarter.
Crazy amounts of money.
Meta, not dissimilar, about 50.
Yep.
And then Amazon about 100. So you have got, in fact, the tech companies are moving OPEX to CapEx.
And somebody's building their own nuclear power plant. Is that Amazon?
Yeah. I mean, that's for the energy issue.
Crazy.
In addition to the compute issue. So one of the things you learn is that. The second thing is, just reflecting on it, it is amazing. Our industry is an industry that has seen all these huge changes. Okay. And, if you think about going back to when you were at Y&R doing the internet, let's say in the 90s, the mid-1990s.
I was there in 94. I remember when Mosaic was released.
If you think back to those times, we witnessed, the flowering of the Mag 7, which now CNBC this morning were calling the MAGA 7. That might it might filter through to the audience in a second as to what we're
give 'em
talking
time.
about. You know, Meta is certainly a mega part of the mega 7. So we've witnessed that growth, and we've witnessed obviously NVIDIA and the explosion in NVIDIA and the growth of these multi-trillion-dollar companies. I mean, these are nation states.
Crazy.
So
Crazy.
I mean, I think what people forget, you know, Apple is now approaching 4 trillion in terms of market value.
Which would make it the third or fourth largest country in the world.
Yeah, so US is 28. If you equate market cap to GDP, US is 28, China's 18, Europe as a whole is 18.
Yeah.
Biggest country would be Japan at about, I think it's
3 to 5.
seven.
Yeah.
No,
Seven. Okay.
six or 7. And then you drop down to Germany around 5 or 4.
Yeah.
And then UK, France, Italy, Spain, all sort of 3, 3.5, 2.5, 2. So you are talking about nation states.
Yep.
And that's what people forget. And I'm reading some articles recently. I mean, it's not beyond the wit of, I mean, NVIDIA is threatening that Apple valuation becoming the most valuable company again on the planet.
Yep.
So it's not beyond the wit that these companies will achieve 10 trillion. So I think the other thing to think about, you know, our industry is much maligned in many ways. You know, if you think about it, it's an illogical industry in many respects.
What's much maligned? What
Well,
part of it? Is it
you know,
advertising? Is
there
it
are a lot
marketing?
of-
Is it marketers? Is it
Well, a lot of-
agencies? What? Ad
If you think
tech?
about the economic model for a minute, it doesn't bear a lot of examination, because if you think about it for a minute, clients are moving business from agency to agency
Yep.
at reduced terms. People are moving from agency to agency often at increased terms. So you have a compression.
Yep.
And, you know, coming back, just I mentioned what I call the Oy-Vey merger, right, which is Omnicom Interpublic, Oy-Vey.
You knew we were going to get to the merger.
This
at some
audience
point.
gets there
you knew
eventually,
it was going to come
right?
up. Yeah.
The Oy-Vey merger. And if you think about that, what's the motivation for that? I mean, it might be a little bit about John Wren wanting to be number one. You know, I think Arthur Sadoun has ordered 70,000 T-shirts with Snoop Dogg on them with an asterisk saying "Top Dog," and I think that Omnicom found that so motivating that they thought they took Philip Krakowski's call. Krakowski, I think, was faced with a difficult situation, IPG under huge pressure. No analyst has written how much revenue has been lost from IPG. You know, it goes back to Microsoft, Verizon, Pfizer, Amazon, J&J. I mean, it's huge. Coke, GM, which opened the opportunity because the conflict disappeared.
Yep.
I mean, you can't have Coke with Pepsi,
Of course.
Omnicom.
No way.
And you probably couldn't have GM with Mercedes or whoever it is at Omnicom. So, but you think about why that happened. Obviously, it's a bit about personalities, putting the joke aside for a minute. But it's also about the compression in the industry. So I would say that.
So merger is required in order to sort of to alleviate that compression.
Yeah, I mean,
you think?
6 have gone. 6 will go to 5. I just make the point. I'm not sure that the book has yet been written on the Oy-Vey merger. And the reason I say that is the Omnicom price has come under huge pressure. It's about 20% off where it was on the pre-announcement. It's a stock-for-stock merger proposal, which actually is a takeover of IPG. But the IPG price is now below its pre-disturbed price or pre-announcement price. So there's what the market's saying is they don't get it.
Yeah.
They don't understand what the hell's... I mean, the market has been pretty tough generally since then. You know, mid-December to late December it came off. But I think people are raising a question as to whether it makes any sense.
It feels like certainly the street is, and it's funny too, Martin. Is you as the sort of I mean, you're the guy who originally rolled up the entire industry.
No,
right?
I'm not.
I mean,
Marion Harper was the guy.
Oh, really?
So everybody forgets.
You saw
the
his
original. No, the original model was Marion Harper in the 1950s, the IPG model.
Oh, okay.
Which was, ironically, where he believed that, you know, in order to deal with the conflict, you had to have separate brands. Yep. And that was true in those days because you were operating at a full 15%, 17.65 on production costs. So you had enough. That compression I mentioned had not occurred.
Yeah.
It was a very gentlemanly business, gentlemanly business.
I was there. It was different.
Very waspy business. And it was a sort of a private club. in those days, and there was price protection. That's all gone. So anyway, coming back to your question, what we've witnessed, what's amazing about our industry is how close we are to these technological revolutions. If you think about the people that we deal with, and I think this is a really important point that people forget about. Last year, ad spending was $1 trillion, excluding mainland China. Of that $1 trillion, Google was 250 billion.
Crazy.
25% share.
Crazy.
Right. Meta was 150, 15 share. Amazon was 61, 6% share. And TikTok outside China, 40 billion, we reckon, 4%. Add those four together, it's 50%. On the previous panel, they talked about multi-channel and the Paramount example and 70 channel. To me, the job of the CMO's got easier. It hasn't got more difficult.
Why is that?
Well, because you've got 4 channels which represent half the market. 500 billion of that trillion is in those four platforms. Add in Alibaba.
But that's where the money is. That might not be necessarily where all the people are, though.
Well, it's a reflection of that. When we started S4 6 years ago, digital was 55%. It's now 70%. Those 4 platforms are 50% of the market and 70%, just under 70%, of digital, because digital is 700 billion of the trillion. 300 billion is in traditional. Traditional is going backwards. You know, if you don't have live sports, you're down 10 to 15%. You know, Discovery, Warner being an example.
Yeah, that's the only thing keeping them floating.
If you have live sports, you're down 0 to 5. So the 300 billion is shrinking. You know, if we came back again next year, the year after, I think digital will probably be about, if it's 70 now, probably 75, 80, 85%. So, I mean, you could argue everything is digital. So there's a compression. I won't say which CMO, I spoke to him last weekend, one of the major global consumer goods, and I put that proposition, his job has got easier, and he agrees. His biggest problem is not determining where the money goes. In his case, it was 70% digital. It was implementing, it came up in the course of the AI transformation process, is how you get an organization to change at scale. And with AI at the moment, what we're seeing is audits, tests, experiments, workshops,
pilots.
The whole enchilada.
I'm not seeing it either.
Very rare. I mean, one thing we're intimately involved in with Monks is General Motors and the change there this year. That is, in my view, the only major overall marketing transformation that we've seen so far. So, you know, we look at AI. It was certainly, you know, wow was the 2 years ago. How was last year. This year has got to be about now. It's got to be. I mean, NVIDIA this time last year was saying to us, where are the use cases? They're building out all this capacity. Where we got the use cases? A year on, we have a few, but I think it's very elemental, and people are very hesitant. The interesting thing about major transformational change is usually inside organizations, you know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So there's an inertia. So going back to that CMO conversation, he said he agreed that his life had got simpler from a sort of media point of view, if you like, but where it's got much more difficult is to implement huge organizational change. You know,
why is that so hard? So look back. Why? Because listen, the MMA is a nonprofit trade association for CMOs trying to create change, to support them in change, to give them the science to create change. And the resistance, and I wouldn't say it's an outright resistance because that sounds like there's a cause behind it. The inability to create change is kind of surprising to me for marketing people. Why is it? Why is it so hard?
I don't think it's surprising. So, you know, without naming names, I think one of the European digital transformations, AI transformations we've been involved in, that only happened because they made a major organizational change. So the center said, we're going to change in Europe. Let's say there were 30 countries, 30 country heads, CMOs reporting into the country heads. The head of Europe probably resistant to the change being imposed on him when things were going okay. You know, again, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. the organization moved him aside, brought in somebody from America with a CMO from America, installed them in Europe.
Yep.
The country CMOs, instead of reporting to the country heads, reported into the CMO for Europe.
Yep.
All resistance removed.
Oh, okay. So
and
it was
implemented.
Organizational, right?
So that's one thing. On a global scale, I think what has to happen is management has to think through very carefully the social implications. I mean, it was touched on, Spike touched on it in his session around HP. There's a sort of an inverse relationship, I think, to the propensity to people to change. You know, the further up you go in an organization, the more resistance you get. We control things by controlling information, the flow of information. The interesting thing about NVIDIA, which Spike mentioned, is that Jensen Huang has 51 direct reports. If we went to McKinsey or indeed to the MMA, you would tell us, the maximum span we could have is 12 or 13 people.
Yeah.
In an AI-driven company, that may not be the case because information flows freely. Organizations are much flatter. Jensen apparently doesn't do one-to-one meetings. You're a direct
He does
report,
very limited number.
gives you about 4 or 5 KPIs or targets, objectives, and then monitors your achievement of those objectives. So it's a far leaner, more efficient organization. I know in the agency business, people control things. So coming back to the question about how do you get the change, I know of 4 or 5 major global companies who are changing, who are exploring the marketing model of the future, which the MMA is focused on. The ability of CMOs to implement, I think, is quite difficult. You often find that the profits inside the companies are not evenly distributed.
Okay.
You may find that you have large pools of profit in North America or Asia, China, for example, or Latin America and Mexico and Brazil. Right. And therefore, and empires have been built 100%. Figuratively inside companies. 100%. And that CMO that I referred to just earlier, who said his job has become simpler and it was the internal organization, in implementing the changes that he made in his organization, you had to make personnel changes to reduce resistance inside the organization. So I think there has to be huge change. The other thing I think that's going on, which is really interesting, and let me give you 2 specific examples, or maybe 3. 3 industries where you're seeing very significant strategic change, and that's causing CMO behavior to become more. The other thing I would just say is it's not just CMOs. I mean, I've said to Adobe, and I have to thank them for allowing us to participate in all this, that really we should be having conferences not with CMOs, we should be having conferences with CMOs and CIOs.
Yeah.
John Chambers at Cisco used to run a CEO-CIO conference every 2 years in Kiowa Island many years ago. I think Chuck Robbins probably still does it. I always thought that was a really good formula because for transformational change, you really need CMO, CIO, CFO, you could argue procurement officers, all involved. But anyway, coming back to the CMOs, 3 industries. Auto industry, Chinese EVs. Whatever President Trump does on tariffs, the Chinese are still going to be able to deliver EVs to the markets at lower prices.
Absolutely.
Through subsidy or whatever it is.
Everybody said, yeah.
So CMOs in the auto business, they're worried that CEOs are going to ring up one day and say, you have to reduce your media budgets. Because we're under cost pressure. And they don't want to do that. So what they're doing, and this drives me crazy when they use this phrase, they're trying to reduce their non-working media costs, which I get very upset about because that's what we do, right? Agencies. And we talk about it at Monks being, us being faster, better, cheaper. Yeah. Which, by the way, there's some argument as to where that came from. And I went to Gemini, and I asked Gemini, where did it originate? Interestingly, it came out of NASA, from the guy who ran NASA from 91 to 99, where that phrase originally came from. And I also asked the word, where did the word frenemy come from?
It came from you.
No, it didn't. It came from
really?
Walter Winchell.
I thought for sure it was you.
Gemini, never wrong.
I said, okay.
Gemini, never wrong. It's
Walter
Winchell.
might have a little hallucination about Gemini, a little bit.
Anyway,
but
let me go back to non-working costs. So they're trying to cut non-working costs. And that's where we come in because, what we're trying to do.
That's where Monks comes in.
Yeah, that's what, and AI comes in because it's reducing, improving the work process, the work profile, the process through AI, and reducing so-called non-working costs. That's one industry. Second industry, financial services, exactly the same thing. It's not Chinese EVs in that case. It's the fintech companies. So if you're a big global bank and you're trying to compete against Nubank, for example, in Brazil or where it happens to be, again, you might be spending, say, 300 million on media globally. So it's not in the scale of the autos, or the big package goods companies, but you might be spending that. And you're worried that your CEO is going to call you and say, compress it. So again, take down the cost. Third industry, drinks industry. Spoke to
drinks and AI, really?
Yeah, drink alcohol, beer, whatever. Spoke to one company. They spend $4 billion a year on marketing. Their create costs are double digit. Right, so that's more than 400 million. When we used to get 15%, as commission,
we call that the good old days.
We'd allocate 10% to creative, 5% to media. When it got squeezed down to 10, we'd say 7.5, 2.5.
Right.
The fact that this company is
I was in media, I remember.
The fact that this company is still spending double digit on create costs, tell you. So in that case, it's more than 400 million.
Okay, so back to the pattern recognition. We'll go way back. So I got you in the compression. You brought the whole thing around. So I understand kind of what you're saying. Are you really saying that then AI fundamentally, foundationally, is about really just efficiency? And how dramatic are those efficiency gains going to be? Do you have a sense of that looking forward?
Well, we go into pitches saying we can reduce your cost by 30% or more.
Okay.
So take that example I just gave, that 400 million. You can knock off 120.
Huge. So how much of it do you think, though, is going to end up? So listen, there's really three elements there, right? It's efficiency, there's effectiveness, impact, and performance improvements, and then I think there's wild, crazy-ass new stuff that we haven't thought of yet. So let's just focus on the two because those are measurable at this point. So efficiency down, you can think you can improve it 30%, take that off. That's amazing. At least. It should be.
Well, but let me just back up from it because I do think there are three things that clients really have to think about. The first thing is about agility, right? In a world which is under such pressure, I mean, just getting up this morning and hearing what might be happening in Greenland, what might be happening in Canada, what might be happening around the Panama Canal. I mean, all these things coming at you, it's like, being...
we weren't going to talk about the crazy factor, though. We were going to focus on other elements.
Look, we have to get used to the fact that it is going to be
the world's changed.
Very volatile. And, China-US bifurcation. Russia-Ukraine, even if there's a settlement, I mean, President Putin will not stop. We might get some better news out of the Middle East, we'll see. But it's going to be a very volatile world, very different to what we've experienced, over the last 40, 50 years since World War II. So in that world, agility is going to be absolutely key. The second thing is, I think marketeers have to take back control. It is very strange for somebody from the agency business to say that. But after the great financial crisis, CFOs used to say, look, we have to outsource. There are three models, agency models. There's the classic outsource to the agency, the embedded where we put people into the client, and then the in-house model. The example, we're the subject of a Harvard Business School case study.
It's what McKinsey focuses on all the time.
So, and we're not frightened to put ourselves out of business in the sense because in the in-house model, there are two things clients need. They need to be updated on technology and on the churn on people. So there's always a demand for good people. Good people don't like to work on just one vertical. They like a variety of experiences. So that's the background to all this, Greg. And I think in that world, efficiency is going to become more important. Turning to what AI does, in my view, and there's a lot of sophisticated chatter and language around what it does. So let's try and simplify it for minds like mine. So the first area is visualization and copywriting, and it's been touched on the panels Huge change there. There will be fewer copywriters. There will be fewer art directors as a result.
Okay.
And because it's taking us less time, and we charge in part as agency on a time-based model, our fees are going to be less. Okay, that's one thing. The second area is hyper-personalization at scale. And that is a huge change. And that's much better news. There will be more people employed on that. We're producing, for a Netflix series prior to AI or the stimulation of AI, we might have produced 1.5 million assets for a campaign, at least theoretically. We're now producing multiples of that. The price per asset is falling, but the total revenues are growing. Increased
and the total assets are going up too. So I almost wonder,
Well, human creativity becomes really important in that.
Yeah.
It was James Quincy actually on a call that Jeffrey Sonnenfeld had with about 200 CEOs, a Yale CEO's call. I remember Quincy saying that he's very worried if everybody is hyper-personalizing, how you differentiate in a very crowded marketplace. And the answer is it's through brain power. So that's the second area. The third area, which never gets talked about, because the guts of the holding companies are really around the media business. The volumes that Oive will have will be about 60 billion.
Yep.
Publicis has about 60 billion. WPP has about 60 billion. These are huge billion. That's the guts of their business. That's going to be revolutionized by AI. If that $1 trillion that I'm talking about, let's say that was one client.
Yep.
Why is it that we analyze that $1 trillion as an industry with semi-automatic, semi-manual processes, whereas the investment industry, a BlackRock or a Blackstone, it's all algorithmic.
It's all algorithmic, right?
I mean,
so of course we're getting there. Is your point?
Well, that's going to be a huge change.
Yeah.
So you will not rely on a 25-year-old media planner.
Correct.
You will rely on an algorithm. And the role of this is really important in my view. We have to get closer to I mentioned frenemy. That's a misdescription now. Go back to the 500 billion or the 700 billion that's digital, which would be even greater. Those 4 companies that have half the market, you have to get closer to them. You have to get closer to an Adobe. And with all due respect to an Oracle or a Salesforce, an Apple and a Microsoft and NVIDIA, because we're part of that ecosystem. No client is going to accept, you wouldn't go to Rupert Murdoch, no criticism of Rupert Murdoch, say, where should I spend all my money? Right. You go to the agency and say, is it right to go all into Murdoch properties or whatever it happens to be? But you would want, we are the validator. This I think is really important. We are
agencies are the validators.
Yes. Yes, and that's increasingly where, in my view, it's going to go. We will be the partner that validates the media plan and the media execution. The other thing that we've got to get our minds around is, we've got a venture fund at S4. So we raised about $100 million. We've invested, the latest investment was in Runway, the text-to-video platform. We're looking at a Chinese company called Minimax, which we're going to take to Cannes, I think, this year to show everybody what they're doing. That's a text-to-video and text-to-audio
Which is
company.
Crazy how far this
now,
come.
It's not far to go to where you could have a machine prompt for creative and a machine prompt for media plan and buy. In fact, PMax at Google and Advantage Plus at Meta are already there.
They've already been doing
with
it.
a small and medium-sized business. They don't want to disturb the enterprise ecosystem, at least yet.
But it's built.
But it's going to come.
But it's built there. Okay. Listen, they've just run us out of time.
Okay.
So
that's a polite way of saying you're talking too much.
No. Well, the clock said it. So listen, just to wrap it up though. So this trend, this AI situation, this dynamic, this change in the marketplace, more dramatic than anything you've ever seen? Bigger deal than internet was? Bigger deal than mobile was?
Probably.
Yeah.
But, there are
like
other things floating around. Your metaverse, we've sort of forgotten about. And, I haven't gone through a cancer thing recently and seen the medical advances that things like the metaverse are doing. Quantum computing. I mean, I think Jensen Huang sort of dampened down a bit the time frame there yesterday here at CES. But the advances, blockchain. I mean, there's so many frictions in our system now.
Yeah.
You know, why is it, again, let me head on this. Why is it the clients still don't know what they pay for a TV spot in Japan?
No.
Why is it?
Yeah.
Doesn't make any sense.
And then we don't really understand the
so
value of that too.
removing the friction inside the system. So all these technologies are going to enable us to do that. So you'll have a much more transparent. You know, we run a thing called Glassbox Media as one of our go-to markets because we think that the media marketplace, you know, suffers from not being as transparent as it could be.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Martin, I can't thank you enough. I was super excited to do this. Nobody knows more. Nobody has more data than he does. Listen, thank you everyone for joining us this morning. This series of programming was brought to you by Monks and Adobe AI Now, Marketing's Journey from Here to Now. Thank you. Thank you.